Hello, everyone, and welcome to Day 2 of Erwin Insights. I am excited today to introduce Scott Lawson from QAD. Scott, thank you so much for kicking off Day 2 of Erwin Insights.
Hey, thank you, Kathy. Great to be here.
I think we have a lot to get to today, as I recall. So without further ado, why don't I turn the session right over to you to begin?
Okay, thank you very much. That's terrific. And as Kathy said, building a great enterprise architecture practice is my topic. And I'm going to share with you some thoughts about how we at QAD have built a practice of enterprise architecture, and not too bad. Well, we're doing other stuff. So let's get to that straight away. But I do want to tell you a little bit about QAD. We're a software manufacturer for manufacturers. So that means we make ERP and supply chain software. We're based in California, but we have offices all over the world. And last year in 2019, we had our 40th birthday, 40th anniversary. So we're 41 years old this year, making great enterprise software for great manufacturers to run their manufacturing business. And so as such, we have a lot of people, a lot of languages, a lot of things, a lot of products, lots of stuff going on. So we needed enterprise architecture to keep track of that stuff, to understand our enterprise and how it was built. Just like a gigantic ship, they don't just happen. They have great plans. They design things. They write it all down. They know where every single bolt and the wire is in a big floating hotel like that. And we like to attempt to do that for QAD Enterprise. But of course, it's not a thing, it's not a ship, it's an enterprise, and it shifts all the time, it moves, you don't know what's happening all the time. And so we use enterprise architecture and some great tool sets to be able to keep track of those things. So I've talked a lot about enterprise architecture, but what the heck is that anyway? Not everybody knows, and everybody has a different opinion. And so I went out to that great little tool called the internet, and I looked up some definitions. Of course, I have my definitions, but the general definition taken from Wikipedia is this. Hey, EA is a well-defined practice using a comprehensive approach for the execution of strategy. And you can read that. You do a lot of stuff, you analyze, you design, you plan, you implement, but you need a comprehensive approach. And I thought it was interesting here at all times for the successful development of execution of strategy. So not a point in time kind of thing. They also say that it involves some principles and practices to guide us through four things: business, information, process, and technology. And you'll see how those four things play out in a practical manner on when you build your enterprise architecture practice and when you use the tool sets that will support that practice. And lastly, there's people who do it. There's people like me and like you and like your colleagues who are enterprise architects or who want to be, and they're responsible for performing this work. So what do? They analyze business structure and processes. That's really what you do. But that sounds kind of boring. What also do you do? Well, you look at all the things of the business. And so you can see there, the goal, all that information is to address the goals of the enterprise: effectiveness, efficiency, continuity, whatever your goals are. Enterprise architecture should support those goals. So those are some general definitions. That's great. But those of you might work in the United States government, and back a while ago, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, the government started looking at enterprise architecture and said, you know, this would be a good thing to have for all of our agencies. And they mandated in a specific law that government agencies of a certain size need enterprise architecture. And the United States government then drilled down onto that, and they define EA as a strategic information asset base. And I like that because it's assets. So they're saying, hey, what kind of stuff do we have? And you'll see that plays into the kind of stuff that you will collect with your tool set and your practice. It defines the mission, but it needs more about the information necessary to perform the mission and the technologies necessary to perform the mission and the processes for implementing those technologies for the mission needs. So what does all that mean? That really means just, hey, the government says we need to implement new technologies, right? We need to improve service for our constituents, for our public. And EA is a way to get us there by looking at information and technologies and they're really more focused on the technology part. And that's a little bit of a criticism of the government's, the US government's point of view on EA, is that they're specifically about the technology. But what do? You need a baseline architecture. You need to say, okay, what do we got? We're gonna catalog everything we have. So that's one way to build a great practice, is to just start writing stuff down, quote unquote. And the question is, where do you put all that stuff? Well, you're at an Erwin conference, so you probably guess what's coming next, is where do you put all that baseline architecture, but then what are you gonna target for that architecture? And then how are you gonna get there? Are you gonna go in what sequence to get there? And so the government is really focused on that, where are we at, where are we going, and how are we gonna get there? And they don't really, I know they do this, but they don't really dictate a lot of ongoing architecture. Well, there's another definition from a bunch of geeks who wrote the Enterprise Architecture Body of Knowledge, or the EA book, and they talk about the same things, right? It's common activity within or between organizations. We want to analyze all that stuff, and we're worried about the future states and an integrated viewpoint of strategy, business, technology. So those three things, and strategy, business, technology. So if you want enterprise architecture, you need all three of those areas, not just technology, not just strategy, and not just business. Business was sort of a key focus for a long time for business process reengineering, and that's all lovely. But enterprise architecture adds in the strategy and the technology. Now we're going to look at Gartner. Gartner Gartnerizes this. Sorry for any Gartner people out there, but they throw a lot of words in here, and they make it universal. And that's a good thing, because they're looking at this EA as a discipline for proactively and holistically leading an enterprise response to disruptive forces. Now, I'm not going to read the rest of it, but I think this is key with Gartner, is they're like, hey, there are disruptive forces in your business, in your enterprise, and enterprise architecture can help you deal with those, can help you proactively and holistically understand those things. So a lot of people think architecture is just like, hey, I'm going to record all my stuff, and there it is, kind of like a building architect. Like if a building architect came to your house, she could look at your house and draw it up and maybe determine what's in it or whatever, but can't really tell you what the holistic and the proactive thing you should do. It's just a picture. So when you're building a great enterprise architecture practice, yeah, you need to make pictures, you need to make diagrams, but you also need to understand why those diagrams exist, what's in those pictures, who's using that kind of stuff. And so Gartner just goes on to say, hey, it delivers values by adjusting policies and projects, so not just things you do, but how you do them, policies, the reasons for things, the why, and then to steer decision making. So all of these things, I think, are useful for any person who is interested in making a great enterprise architecture practice at their enterprise. And you have to pick and choose the pieces of these that you want. And we have absolutely done that at QAD by defining it using all of those terms. We do, and we're interested in all of those things, but we also define it a little more simply. We feel that EA is a kind of digital twin of the enterprise that gives us X-ray vision into the enterprise. So what does that mean? A digital twin is a kind of a fancy term nowadays, probably invented by Gartner, which is basically a view, a digital representation of some physical thing or some actual thing out there in the world. So you can think of Google Maps, right? Google Maps, if you zoom in on your neighborhood, that's a digital twin of your neighborhood. Now, it doesn't have all the aspects of it, but you can now see, okay, you can see a photo of your house, you can see the roadways, you can see all different kinds of elements in Google Maps as you zoom around. And if you zoom around in a city, you're going to see stores and things like that. That's an example of a digital twin. So what QAD uses enterprise architecture for, and specifically Erwin Evolve, is to give us that web-based digital twin that allows people to look into the organization and go, why is that there? Why does that exist? Who uses that? I have a question about such and such. How do I get that answer? And how does it do that? It's a database of information that allows us to answer the 6 universal questions. And we'll talk a bunch about the 6 universal questions. But they're both about, just like harkening back to the other definitions of enterprise architecture, business and technology objects. It's got to be both if it's going to be enterprise architecture. Lastly, simply, it's a reference for every employee. And I put that in there because, you know, this isn't some ivory tower architect thing. You know, years ago when my boss, the CIO, said, hey, we want to do enterprise architecture. I'm like, what is that? He says, go find out. And I looked and looked at it, and a lot of the stuff was very esoteric and dry. Like people would make diagrams or they'd have books of stuff. Here's your Word document, 62 pages of something or another, and nobody read it, nobody cared. It was just something to do to fill the space or something. And, you know, basically that kind of enterprise architecture gives enterprise architecture a bad name. They're just like, oh, you're just, you know, you're just pronouncing from your ivory tower. You're just making documents and you're writing stuff down, and it's old before its time or whatever. It's out of date and so forth. Well, what we've made with our website, which we actually called evolve.qad.com, based on the product, but based on the premise of this is the evolution. This is what the enterprise looks like today, as that digital twin is. And it's a current representation. So here at QAD, we don't do a lot of today's state or as is state and as is or to be kind of state. We don't look really at like, here's our architecture today and here's our architecture tomorrow. We use the architecture of the moment, the stuff that we have in our website, to understand what the enterprise is today. It is what it is today, and then we move and use those information to figure out what it's going to be tomorrow. But we don't have this compare and contrast because it's a reference. Every employee, all 2,200 people globally can log onto this thing, search for stuff, and cruise around. Not sure everybody does because they have other things to do, but it's there for their usage. So how do you build that practice? Well, I follow the 6 steps. First one is when you're building your enterprise architecture practice, you got to ask the question, why? What are the goals for your enterprise architecture efforts? Why are you doing this? Are you doing it just because somebody said? What are you trying to accomplish out of it? What are the goals? And, you know, for our example, the goal that I just said, the way we define it was the goal for our enterprise architecture is to bring visibility of all the stuff we had. The very first thing we did with enterprise architecture was we cataloged all the systems and what departments used them and how they communicated with one another. And we built this big old map, basically, geez, it was the size of somebody's wall. And we had this gigantic diagram of that. And it didn't even define halfway point of all the stuff, but it gave people a visual picture of, wow, we have a lot of things at QAD. We have a lot of applications. Look, that application does the same thing as this application. What should we do? What decisions should we make now that we can see that clearly and we can share it with everybody clearly? And in fact, that diagram was on the behind the wall of my CIO's desk, behind his chair for a couple of years. You know, because it was effective. We did the same thing with the networks, and we did all kinds of things. And, you know, one of our why was not only to have a vision into our enterprise, but to change it, to do something about it, to make it better and more efficient. For your practice, you also have to define the objects you will collect. That's the what. What are you going to list down? John Zachman, Zachman Framework fame says, you need to list things. The first step in enterprise architecture is to make a list of things. You have to determine, actually, the 0 step there is to determine what things you're going to make a list of. You can't make a list of everything. And I will share some insights as to what that list should contain. How are you going to do this? How are you going to do it? Are you going to do it manually? Are you going to buy a tool that will collect all this information magically for you? Are you going to hire some consultants to do it for you? What is your team? What are the methods you're going to use? And how are you going to build those pieces and put them together? You need a consistent practice. So that's my lesson here, is it's everyday architecture. I tell my team, I have a team of 10 people, every single day, do something, do some architecture. You're in a meeting And Kathy here says, hey, we're going to get a new server or something, write it down, put it somewhere, have a place to catalog the things that change in your enterprise so you can see them better. That, of course, you still need to define your team and your stakeholders. So who is going to be the recipient of your architecture and who is going to be the creator of your architecture. And so, that gives you all the reasons you need for figuring out who to pick on your team and who to involve. I think building a great practice is to involve other departments. Our department is specifically in IT, but we really reach out to a lot of other departments around the company, around the enterprise, and we ask them, what are your processes? We go out to our stakeholders and we offer our service, and so that people are aligned and they understand what we're doing. So we will say, hey, marketing, I know that you want a new website. Can you tell us your processes for website publishing? And we write it down. We put it into our tool. We come back to them and say, are these your processes? This is what we understood. We understood this is the tool set you use. Oh yeah, you're right. You're a partner. And they didn't have time to write it down. We had time to write it down for them. You have to define where this information is going to exist. So what tools are you going to use, Erwin? And what artifacts and deliverables are you going to produce? So an artifact is different than a deliverable. An artifact is a piece, a single unit of things. So one artifact might be a list of servers. Okay, great. So you're going to make a list of servers, or another artifact might be a list of requirements or rules or laws that you need to follow. That might be another list. But what is the deliverable out of that? Is it just the list so people can read a boring list, or is it something else? So deliverables usually are in enterprise architecture are sent out as diagrams and reports and things like that. But it's a good idea to define them up front. Lastly, when. So what timescale do you want? Do you want to do just as is? That's what QAD does. Basically, when you go to our site, it's the as is architecture. This is what is happening today. And it might be out of date, but we try to keep it up to date with collecting information in an automated way from multiple systems. But you might want to do a 2B and just say, you know what, we want to dream up the dream. We want to dream the vision and we want to paint the picture. You can use enterprise architecture principles and tools to do that just fine. Or you can do both, or you can do just a one-off, like, hey, we're just going to use EA as a project. We're going to, invest in it. It's going to be a 6-month thing. We're going to look at the office over there in I don't know, Pennsylvania. We're going to see what happens when we move it. And we can use the principles and the diagrams and the outputs and all this stuff to figure out the best thing to do with the Pennsylvania office, or whatever your subject is. So these are the 6 steps. And notice these are the 6 universal questions tied to those steps. Those questions lead into the critical elements that your team needs to collect. So why, to me, is the universal big question that people often miss. And if you're a geek like me and you've ever seen the Zachman framework, he has these 6 questions. I didn't invent this. This is John Zachman identified these 6 universal questions. And he didn't invent it either. He just identified it like the periodic table of the elements. He was just discovering these questions and how they fit into the enterprise and the architecture of the enterprise. And the last column on his framework is why. But I put it the first. And if you talk to him, he's like, column order doesn't matter. Why to us is most important. The reason why it was most important to QAD is because we didn't have a lot of why. In fact, truth be told, don't tell anybody, we don't really have a ton of why right now either, even if we've been working on it a while, but we're trying to get people to tell us why. What is the motivation? What are the strategies? We do have a strategic plan. Every department has a strategic plan. The company has a strategic plan. You can read it on the, on the FCC web, or the government website or whatever, because we're a public company. But why are these things happening? Like what you need to drill down into it rather than just bullet lines like, we want to make a lot of money or whatever. That's great, but what's the details of those whys? And you need to catalog those. You need to treat them like an element in an object. The next thing that's much easier for people is what? What are the data and the things of your business? What are things? Well, Okay, well, the things are the pieces of equipment or something. The data is the data we use. Hey, we have a customer list, and we have an ingredient list, and we have an equipment list or whatever if we're an ice cream store or something like that. How is what enterprise architecture is often all about: processes and procedures. How do we do things? Step one, step two, step three. We need to ask those questions of every piece. And so these elements are things that you need to collect and proverbially write down and put into your system and understand, how do we define processes? Do we make them hierarchical, and do we assign them to departments, or how do we express processes and procedures? One good way to express processes that we use at QAD is to do a verb noun kind of thing. So a process is mow the lawn, okay, or cook dinner or whatever. And we try to narrow down our process names into something simple and understandable when the deliverables come out. Where is offices, locations, where you do work, but that might not just be offices, locations. That might be where things happen. You might not own those locations. You might be a business where things happen. If you're a transportation business, let's say, things happen on public land or on a thoroughfare or whatever. You need to look at those critical elements and define them. Who? This one often throws people for a loop. Who are people? That's obvious. People are into groups called departments, or called sub-departments or whatever. Those are also who. But then we define who as applications, and we do that because applications act like people doing work. In the old days, maybe everybody had to dig a hole with their hands, and then they got an application, which is called a shovel, and they were able to use this tool, this application, to do the work. And the shovel, acting like a lever and a plane, is able to dig a better hole than you can dig with your hands. And then it came along and we got a steam shovel, and so forth and so on. You get my point. Computer applications are the same way. Your loan that you just got to refinance your house, it was not all done by a human. It was done by a loan application and a bunch of code behind it. So applications and the code that they're built of are critical element to keep track of. When the last item on here, but not least, are calendars and cycles. Every business has cycles. I just mentioned an ice cream store. Maybe they get more busy in the summer. I'm not sure, but I like ice cream in the summer. Maybe software companies like QAD, we have a cycle every 6 months where we release software, and has a bunch of different processes and things that happen on those days. If you're worried about payroll or you're worried about HR, there are cycles in those kind of things. You need to, in your enterprise architecture, because it's about everything, identify the time element when. Now, to put this in more clear case, I've split these things up into two things: IT and business. So the 4 pillars of IT that we follow, and we do more than this, but this is what we generally put them up, are applications, equipment, technology, and data. If you're not going to do anything else, and if you're IT oriented, collect the list of things on these items. So make sure that you are understanding all of these items: applications, equipment, technology, and data. And for QAD, applications are big and small, okay? Google Docs is an application. A cron job that somebody wrote on some server that's running, sending out emails and processing work, is an application. Adobe Acrobat is an application. And I'll go get to some examples of these a little later. Equipment, same way. Technology, same way. And data. And so you have to think about these things to have a great practice. Then there are 4 keys of business, and these I've listed here. Strategies, already talked a ton about that. Strategies and goals. Strategies and goals are different. They're very easy to confuse. A lot of people do confuse them, but a strategy is, how we're going to get somewhere, why we're doing that, okay? If we go to the ice cream store again, our strategy is to make the freshest, most colorful ice cream possible. And the goal is to sell X amount of that ice cream or whatever. Policies and controls are things that are imposed upon you by other forces usually, or yourself. Some companies have, well, our policy is to, when we sell a pair of shoes, we give a pair of shoes away. That's their policy. That is key to their strategy and their goals because they want to sell 100,000 shoes or whatever. But their policy is that never make one shoe, a pair of shoes, make two because we're going to give one away. Controls are anything that's imposed upon you, again, by yourself or more usually externally. So SOX controls, Sarbanes-Oxley controls, NIST framework security, cybersecurity controls, audit controls. And then cycles, of course, I've talked about before, are the keys of business. So you really want to focus in on doing these 8 things and what they mean to you when you build your practice. And you don't have to do them all. You don't have to collect every single application that your company has. Maybe you just choose the scope of some applications. So that's where we get into the scope. All enterprises are different. You want to determine your short-term and long-term goals. Think about what data you have available. You can't get data, can't get blood from a stone, as they say. If you don't have the data, it's very difficult to do this. So I do not suggest like, okay, on your servers, okay, I'm going to go and log on to every server and write down its name or whatever. You need a system to collect that information and then import that information into your enterprise architecture system. You also need to determine the resources available to keep that stuff up to date and think about your tool set. What tools are you going to use? For us, we use Erwin tools. We used to use other tools, which were okay. But for us, not to be too much of a commercial, but Erwin has done well. They have a bunch of tools we don't use and we don't really need, or they look cool or whatever, but not into it or whatever. We use a focused set of tools from Erwin to be able to collect information from different systems and then put it into the enterprise architecture and associate it together, because that's what we're doing. Now, the business objects, I wanted to give you some examples. So here's some strategies for you. We talked about why. Here's some strategies. I'm not going to read through all these. You can see these are some strategies. So these are just some triggers for you to look at to say, okay, these are some business objects that I can collect. So here's some goals, whatever the goals are for your business. Here's some examples of policies. And these are examples of policies that we have in place here. What are those policies and how do they relate to systems? And you can see that if all managers have a 10K signing authority, you need to know where that signing authority is executed. Is that in DocuSign or is that in some other system? And you can associate a policy with a system, just like you can associate goals with a policy. And then some examples of cycles from various businesses around the globe here. When do things come up for expiration? What do we have to do for restocking if we're retail, and so forth like that. Some examples of technology objects, and I've already referred to some of these. Who is doing the work? These are your applications. So these are some applications that we have at QAD. And you get down to a point of understanding what you're going to name the application and all the data and information about your application. I'm going to do a demo in a little bit just to show you what we collect for applications. Equipment, here's some examples of equipment names, okay? And you might have these names or you might have other kind of names, but what is a piece of equipment? For QAD, we get down to the router and the wireless access point level. We also define equipment as printers and projectors even on that. So we want to know where stuff is, but you might go, well, that's too much of detail. We're not going to list every piece of equipment because we don't know where they are. In fact, the printer one is one I'm working on. Yeah, I don't know how many printers are QAD, that people just buy them. How do I list those? That's a practical question you have to ask yourself. Now, technologies, we see it as sometimes I see a lot of advice as listing technologies as applications or even as equipment, but we've split all that out. And for us, technologies are what is used. So technologies for QAD are universal things. FTP, MySQL database. Nobody, well, somebody invented FTP, but nobody really owns it. You don't buy FTP. You don't buy Node.js language. You do buy Microsoft Windows 10. That's true. There's a license there, but it's kind of a universal platform that people use to run other things. So our technologies are all kinds of things like that. And we tend to link the technologies. I'll show you one. In our website, when you go to a technology, it brings up the Wikipedia page for that technology so people know what the heck it is you're talking about. And that way I don't have to type it all in. Data is a critical thing to collect. And you can see some list of data. And data we do as a hierarchy. And we have, you can example the first bullet there, sales database might be what we call an entity or a database or a data store. And then we have other information in there. Actually, I think SalesDB for us is a data store, and then contact customers and sales activity might be what we call entities, which roughly translate to tables in a database. And then, you know, contracts could be a kind of a blob object, or you know, going back to the ice cream store, what is the ingredients inventory you need to keep track of. So these are all technology objects, and you can see the who, what, where, and what kind of lists on there. Now, to bring this real, this is a quick overview, and it's not exhaustive, of what QAD collects as objects. You can see we have about 20 plus objects here, and you can see numbers on them, and you can see colors on them. The numbers mean how many objects we had of that type the last time I checked, and this was a few months ago. I didn't count them all up just yesterday, but it's a rough idea. They don't, you know, change a huge amount unless we decide to import a ton of them. And so you can see we collect things like aliases. Aliases are things like erwin.com or whatever. That would be a name of something else. It would also be a server name, like deathstar.qad.com might be an alias to something. If you look over on the how column, we have projects there. Projects are actual projects in a tool we use called Smartsheet that we import. And we have imported 378 projects over the years and catalog those and relate them to other things, and so forth and so on. I won't go over those in gory detail, but basically the ones in green are ones that we import or collect with an Erwin tool, which I think it's called DT now, but it used to be called Collector. And so once we set it up, they just come into our database and they get auto-associated with various things. Now, comes closer to the demo time. I'm going to show you these things. Hopefully I won't miss any, but I will show you these things live in our live system here. And so we have 7 things here. Application communications are applications and the data with which they interact. Application technology stacks are, hey, that application sits on some equipment and it uses some technology. What's up with that? Capability hierarchy, we can drill into the capabilities. The regular hierarchy, I don't think I'll show you this because that goes with the capability hierarchy, but this is a template type to use any kind of hierarchy. And then network diagrams, process hierarchies, and process VPMN diagrams that show you those related applications and roles. Okay, now we're going to go into a live demo of these principles with examples. We're going to look at some of these things, object list associations and so forth, but on the previous slide, we're going to look at those elements over there. So let me escape out of here and jump into my live environment and make this full screen. So this is Erwin Evolve, and we have it at evolve.qad.com. And what we have here on the top row are just some helpers. You can see it says how to use this site. We've configured it this way. And then on the left-hand side, I have some menu items here that I'll go into and look, hey, there's those famous questions that I've been talking about. So if I go into one of these elements, it just talks about what is enterprise architecture, and I can go back to my home page, and I can talk about the objects of the enterprise and so forth. And you can see I'm putting all of that information that I told you within the site so that people can orient them to the site. And we have a search box over here, and I even talk about how to search in this site. But on the example outputs and deliverables, we wanted to look at, to me, what's the crown jewel of our output and deliverable, and that's what we call an application communication diagram. And you can see under here on the third row here, architect views. We have many, many more diagrams than this, but these are our key systems. And you can see the names of those key systems over here. And we can go to a pretty simple one. I'll go to this thing called EQMS application communication diagram. And you can see here is our diagram. I have a legend on here that I can take a look at, and I can look at all these various items. I can zoom in to this particular thing so I can see it better. Of course, it's all done in a very nice way. I can click the four-headed arrow and zoom back out. But more importantly, I can say, what is this thing? Okay, you'll notice here's an application called Erwin DT Collector. This is what we use to collect information. And when I click on it, it pops up all the information I'm talking about. The properties of the information, a short description, the application criticality, some data that it delivers, and so forth and so on. Even the location of where it is and what equipment it's installed on. So that is pretty nifty. That's an application communication diagram. And I want to show you a big one. One of the bigger ones we have is called the QAD Enterprise. This is the one for our main ERP system. And you can see that the gray item is an application suite, and the blue are all different applications. So this at a glance for an individual shows somebody, wow, this is a key system, and these systems are all set up in there. They're connected. We don't want to mess with this over here. And then you can see these parallelograms here. These represent data. It's over here in the legend that tells you about it. But if I look at something like customer data, I can click on this word customer, and it shows me again through associations all the places where customer data is sourced and delivered from all these different applications. So, auditor comes along and asks me, where's all your customer data? I have this at my fingertips and can check it out. And if I don't know what something is, I might go, what is this change point thing? I can click on this change point thing over here, and it will refresh the page and go to that application itself. And you can see I get this application in a big view here. So this information is the same information that was showing in the pop-up lane. And I get the diagram over here for change point. And then I get down here, if I scroll a little more, what is called the application technology stack. If you remember from that list, I was telling you that this is an application. It's called ChangePoint, and it is listed. Let me zoom into that a little bit. It is running on all these gray boxes. Those are servers over there, and so I can scroll down into see any of those gray boxes over there and drag it around, and I can see some orange elements in here. These are the pieces of technology that are running. So if I want to know, hey, what servers run Microsoft SQL, I can click on Microsoft SQL, and I can go into this as an object. This is one of those technologies objects I was telling you about, where we have Wikipedia page built in to tell us all about Microsoft SQL, and we have a description here. But what I can do is say, well, where is SQL distributed? Over here, I have this distribution networks, which is where, and you can see, well, we don't have a list of locations where SQL is because we're not quite that good, but we do have a list of where it is on all of the equipment. And I have a list of equipment over here. This is one of those list views. And again, I can click on one of those and say, oh, well, what is this server over here that's running? I see that it has a description of CBOS. And in here, I don't have this on very many diagrams. I only have it on a technology stack diagram. And I can navigate in this way, is that this is the CBOS. This is where that server shows up. And it too has, if you remember where we came from, Microsoft SQL is what we're looking at here. So this gives us a way to do that. And of course, the tools allows me to download this as a TIFF. I can annotate it, I can print it, I can make comments on and all that good stuff. But this is not a demo of that. What we also have is at the top level, we have some business objects. If you remember, a great enterprise architecture practice is made by collecting not only technology, which I've just talked a bunch about, but business objects. And one of the business views we have is called the capability view. I have a capability view here, and at the top level, we have this diagram that is the 9 top capabilities that we feel we have at QAD. So you can see technology infrastructure, security, and stuff like that. And if I drill down into security, it shows me the subcategories of security. And it shows me, oh, okay, well, here's all the pieces of security. What do we use for identity and access management? And I can drill down further into here and get a list, essentially a visual list of all the applications we use for identity and access management. And I could go, what is this new arrivals and separation thing? I wonder what that is. I can click on that to see the information. Remember, I was showing you the pop-up over here, and I can drill down into it, and shows me 2 different kinds of information over here. Notice I'm looking at it in a capability view, but I can then drill right into the application communication of the application here called new arrivals and separation and get that same kind of diagram. So everything is interlinked in that way. We also can get just lists of things. So I'm going to go to the top level here, and I can say, well, what does the network look like at a certain location? And in here, I have a list of infrastructure. I say where, and I go to networks by location, and I can get a list of those networks by location right here. And if I want to, I can filter those or export that information. And depending on the network, I can go and find an office. So maybe I don't know networks. I'm like, I don't know. What are the what's the location hierarchy? So maybe from a business point of view, I might say, oh, well, North America, we have these items in here. And gee, we have an office in Farmington Hills. And I can basically look at that office in Farmington Hills to see what's in it. And here is the network diagram for our Farmington Hills office, which shows objects of routers and firewalls and pipes and stuff like that. And I can even go and find out on the motivation intentions. We don't have much here, but notice I have a business resumption plan for that office. That's how we do things. This is motivating us. And in this document viewer, it will show me the business resumption plan that I have connected to that office. And you can see my breadcrumb trail up here. Now, we also have process hierarchies. That's the last thing I want to show you. We do have, well, actually, let's go over to here to the NIST cybersecurity framework. This is controls, and this is the NIST control view. So you can take frameworks that are existing and build them into this tool if you want to. But let me, I digress there. Let me go to the business process framework. This is a hierarchy view of our business processes. These are the highest level frameworks. And let's say I drill down into customer relationship framework, and I can see all of these things that are involved in our customer relationship framework. And I can see that this is a high level process, implement products and services. Well, I can drill down into that as well, deeper into the hierarchy. And I can say, oh, look, I have all of these products and services, and I do these 4 things when I implement products and services. And I can drill into something we call easy onboarding, and it shows sub-processes as well. And at this, they changed the color green. And I don't have a legend on this, but I could. We didn't feel we needed one. But when I drill into one of these processes, it's going to show me the detail view. This is the actual swim lane BPMN diagram for those processes all the way down. So I drill down all the way from process framework into this particular process. And you can see here the swim lanes are who does the work. These are roles and so forth. And you can even, depending on the item, you can even click this up over here and you can see the sales representative role over here. I don't think we have this in here, but on some processes, oh, here's one. Creating project estimates and budgets. You can see I have a description of it. I not only say who does it, but I have who, meaning the application that does this. So I've now drilled down into the high-level process to the individual task view, and I can see, oh, somebody does the task in this easy onboarding configurator, and like before, I can go and get that diagram. So at any rate, that is a high-level view of what all of this great enterprise architecture practice has brought to us thus far. And I want to go and move on to the next element. So I'll turn it over to Kathy after I leave you with this, this idea. The greatest teacher failure is, says Yoda. And I like that quote because I'll tell you, it sounds like I have it all together, maybe not, but we've spent years actually building this practice, and we've done a bunch of failures. We've done a bunch of mistakes. We've gone down different roads, and no tool is perfect, no process is perfect, no person is perfect. But I think if you keep at it, you do architecture every single day, you collect the basic things, you have an awesome tool set to collect them in and associate them, then you will have success. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Kathy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Scott. That was really great. I don't think I expected such a detailed lens into QAD and how you manage your applications and the processes behind. Wonderful example of enterprise architecture. And I know you're going to be following up with the questions that we received while you were speaking and doing that great demo. I'm just going to throw a couple at you off the top, if you don't mind. So,
absolutely.
Personally, I think enterprise architecture is important. I think anyone who's attending your session knows the value of enterprise architecture, but sometimes we need to have buy-in from others. So what would be your recommendation for ways that will allow others to see the value of EA?
Well, I think really to get other people to see the value is to talk to them, ask them what they need, what will better help them in their roles, and produce the deliverable or the output for them. And you know, I showed you the application communication diagrams, and that was a direct result of multiple departments, multiple heads of sections of our company, even VP saying, I don't know what we have. We have all this kind of stuff. And they would request things that we already had. And so you really need to ask people, know your audience, know your stakeholders, and design your architecture practice to feed them. And then when they're fed, they will say, hey, that's great. I need more of that.
Perfect. Okay, so I see that you referred to the 6 questions a lot, and that seems very similar to the Zachman framework. Can you explain Erwin products and support therein?
Sure. Well, you know, I intone Zachman all the time. I'm a Zachmanite, as my team calls me. And, you know, it's not about following a particular framework, you know, or methodology to the letter. In fact, the Zachman framework really is a, quote unquote, an ontology, just a way of seeing the world. And you might have seen in my example how Erwin supports that. The tool set, the Evolve tool set, lets you define the views any way you want, lets you define your website any way you want. And they do have Zachman templates out of the box, but I've found over the years that, you know, you hit somebody with a theory and it's confusing. It's better to bring people in where they're at. So what I tried to do is weave the elements of the 6 questions and even the elements of the rows, for those of you who know Zachman framework. My homepage is set up in the rows of perspective of different people. So I go down the rows and I also have the 6 questions without actually showing the Zachman framework. But Erwin definitely has support for any kind of diagram type. You saw the NIST framework diagram that we made. It's pretty easy to do. And so if you're doing any kind of methodology, any kind of framework, you know, not only you can figure it out, but Erwin has some great consultants and great people who will help you, great help desk that will, you know, link you into those views. In fact, the BPMN view we got as a template direct from Erwin. It's built into the system, and you just download it, and then it's got all the objects, and then you just start to create your diagram. So pretty simple.
Right. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you again. If you wouldn't mind going to the last slide there, let's give a little promotion. to our upcoming sessions. So we have documenting and managing organizational risks coming up at 11. Noon is a customer roundtable, which is fantastic. I've already seen a preview of that. As you mentioned, we do have other solutions as well, so be sure to check out the data modeling or data intelligence tracks as well. And then, of course, we have our networking lounge and exhibition hall. In the exhibition hall, Scott mentioned professional services. They have a booth dedicated to them. We have a wonderful organization ready and waiting to help. So if you're interested in knowing more about their services, be sure to check them out, as well as all of the other solutions. And lastly, IT Central Station. We have a dedicated booth for them because we realize the value. They not only provide voice of customer reviews of products, but we also encourage anyone to do a review and be published because it helps others in like-minded when assessing our solutions. So we really appreciate anyone who's willing to sign up and register there to let them do all the heavy lifting and create a review. So in the meantime, Scott, thank you for the final time from Erwin for all of your time and attention to putting this material together. It was very valued and we appreciate it.
Hey, great. Thanks. Glad to do it. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you.